Hello everyone, I'm Alister Benn and you're watching Expressive Photography. Well, I have staggered out of the home studio today just for a couple of hours right at the end of the day really. I came out of the door in such a rush this morning or this afternoon that I forgot to bring my welly boots, and I've decided to come to the wettest part of the area near home, so I'm absolutely soaked already. And I really just came out to get out, to be out in the countryside. I always find this so therapeutic. It always makes me feel better if I'm feeling a bit kind of too much of staring at the computer. So I've come out, like I said, not terribly far from home, really just to see what I can find, just to see what's out here. This is an area I haven't really photographed before, but I do drive past it fairly frequently. And what I'm thinking about today is, it's a very grey afternoon. The only colour really is in the foreground grasses here. And what I'm thinking is I might try and do some black and white photography this afternoon. So I've set my GFX 100S up with a black and white film simulation just to see a different perspective of the world. And there's a whole bunch of trees around here. There's a Scots pine I'm just photographing here. There's a few birch, there's various bits and bobs. So this is the tree that I saw when I was just driving up the road here. I drive this road quite a lot because it's not too far from home, but this tree really caught my eye today, and I think just the way it's so isolated and just sits on top of that little moraine there, it just seems quite prominent. Now, it's a very grey day at the moment. It's pretty overcast. The sun is trying to punch through. It's been raining pretty much all morning. My feet are soaked because I didn't bring my welly boots. But yeah, just the way it sits on the back of the frame there. And I think what I might be interested to do here is look at some of the different film simulations and maybe go with a nice sort of black and white there. I think that's going to work better. Just take the colour out. There's not a lot of colour in it. There's a bit of kind of warm tone in the grasses there. But I think I do prefer the scene in black and white there. It is a very monochromatic image. So I think I'll use a black and white film simulation just with a red filter. I don't actually have a polarizer on. There's nothing to polarize in this scene, but that's a starter, I think, to get the juices flowing. Nice and simple, nearly 65 millimeters with my 45 to 100 in the 65 by 24 pano aspect ratio. I'm not finding the foreground is adding anything to the scene, and above the tree the sky is pretty featureless, so the actual definition in the cloud is really in that middle sector there. So there's no point in adding a bunch of negative space. I don't really think it's adding anything, but I think there is some quite nice texture along this section of the frame, which kind of leads the eye into the sort of nice prominence of the tree. So yeah, that'll do to kick us off. 50th of a second at f14, because the nearest thing in the frame is, I don't know, 35 meters in front of me. I don't really have to worry too much about depth of field issues either. This is what I love about landscape photography. Sometimes something just catches your eye and a title comes into your head. Now this is, I think it's a big old birch tree that's branch is kind of curled around this Scots pine, and it just came to me, the title, The Hug, just like, give me a hug. And there is something very human and tender about it. So what I've been trying here is different approaches to it. This final shot here is at a more stopped down a little, opened up a little bit, f9, and as you can see there's quite a lot of bokeh out of focus area behind the trees there, and I think that really helps. An 1/8 of a second at 100 ISO. Again, this is my 100 to 200 mm lens, and I'm shooting just over 170 mm. Again, the panoramic format I'm wanting to just condense the composition right through that middle section. I don't want any more below or above. I just feel that's absolutely enough. Of course, the raw file of the Fujifilm GFX 100S will have all the pixels, so if I want a different aspect ratio after the event, then that's fine, so we'll see. And again, I'm using this black and white film simulation just because the colours are pretty subdued and I want the structure to be the key thing. It's so strange, I drive along this road almost every day, and just as I was driving along just now, I could see the mist up over the hill there, and this little tree was really quite nicely isolated against the hillside there because of the low cloud that was filtering across. I'm going to stay here a little bit longer to see if that mist can roll in again. It's adding an awful lot to the depth of this photograph, but it's almost raining just now. I mean, it's really starting to spit. Not bad, but you know, it's definitely very grey, very flat, very overcast. There's not a ton of contrast, but what the camera is picking up here is quite strong contrast between the foreground and that misty background, particularly these big empty areas. There is a bit of detail in those clouds, and I think when it comes to processing, I will be able to do something with that. But it's definitely the case that the filter of the black and white preset here is helping to bring up the luminosity in those foreground grasses, and the black and white image is definitely more contrasty and more impactful than perhaps the colour scene would be, certainly if we compare them side by side. So here I am back in the studio, and it's actually some time after now. It's actually a couple of weeks since I recorded that out in the field there, and a lot's happened in that time. We were away running a workshop in Tenerife, which was just amazing, and lots of sunshine. So looking back on a grey day and dull light, and this leads us back from the video we were looking at last week, which is photography all about the light? What about the quality of the light? And what about our attitude to it? And I think this is a really, really good example where so much of the benefits of me being out in the field on that particular day was to be out in the landscape, not to be sat in front of my computer, not to be shipping off hundreds of books, but to just be in the landscape and to accept what was there. Now, some of the things that I did in the field to enhance the experience were using a black and white preview, shooting in a strong panoramic format. Both of those things kind of elevated the landscape, or elevated what I was looking at on the back of the camera, beyond a kind of flat, dull landscape. Now, I think this is a really important thing to differentiate between the time that we spend in the landscape, the reasons why we're in the landscape, and then what we do with the harvested light, to coin an old phrase that I used to use about 20 years ago. We're in the landscape harvesting light. We're using the available light to create aesthetics or compositions that excite, interest us, engage us, take us out of ourselves, and allow for that recreation and therapy of just being in the landscape. So once we sit in front of the computer, we get confronted with images that rarely, or certainly in this case, they don't energize, they don't enthuse to quite the degree that I had in the landscape. I had a blast staggering around there without my Wellington boots getting absolutely soaked and proving that Nike running shoes are very ineffective against wetness out in Scottish bogs. So where do we get to when we come back to the computer? Can we change the decisions that we made in the landscape? Can we find fresh perspectives? Can we use the processing to achieve some of those same effects of therapy and the benefits of creative flow? And the answer, of course, is yes. We can use the entire photographic process to make us feel better about all sorts of different things. And sitting here in front of these photographs, it's not about, oh, they're all dull and flat. It's about, well, what can we do with them? Rather than processing the images in advance, I thought, well, I'm going to open up my Lightroom catalogue, I'm going to look at these photographs, and we're going to sit down and think, well, what can we do with these? this is the first scene with this beautiful Scots pine tree, and it really is a cracker. It's such a striking thing. And I was shooting in a panoramic 65 by 24, and now it feels to me a little compressed. It feels a bit tight round the bottom for now. So the advantage of the new Fujifilm GFX 100S is that cropping in camera does not crop away the pixels as it used to do with my Nikon D850. So I can start to look at different aspect ratios and decide, well, maybe a little bit more of this foreground is going to be advantageous. I do like this sweep of the cloud coming down this diagonal, so I think bringing out some contrast in the sky, lifting the energy of the frame, using the available color that may be there. So these are some of the things that I'm thinking about. Now, I was very particular in the field to make sure that this was level, but it doesn't feel level. And I think that's something that's important when we are starting to process our images, is to get to a point where we think, well, yeah, now it feels right. Sometimes there's all sorts of optical illusions in terms of how the world appears to us when we're there. And I think that is a better orientation, even though it's not technically level anymore. Because we don't see the horizon, we can play a little bit fast and loose with how we decide to do that. One thing I've noticed with the Fujifilm is that it tends to, the blacks can get a little clipped, but the highlights get handled really, really well. So I'm just going to lift my blacks in the tone curve there, and I'm going to open up the shadows just a bit too. We can see how grey and flat this middle ground is. I think there was a cloud just blocking out all the sun, and it just felt kind of flat. So what can I do with this shot? I'm going to start by selecting the sky here. And, you know, Lightroom does a pretty good job these days of managing sky selections. And I'm just going to add some contrast here to try and bring out a little bit more of that texture in the clouds. And there is quite a lot in there. And I'm just going to play around with that. Just being careful with the clipping there as well, just making sure I'm not going to clip anything. Mainly looking through this center area, through the back there. The top might be a little bright, so I might bring that down with a vignette or a brush later on in the process. With the sky selection, I think I'm going to create a sky selection again, and then I'm going to invert that selection, and that will give me everything else. And then I think I'll marry that with a gradient to bring in the, there we go. So now I can open up that foreground a little bit more. I love the fact that Lightroom has now introduced a tone curve specifically for the masked areas. That is a massive improvement on the previous version. And I'm going to add a little bit more clarity and texture to that foreground grasses as well. And that way we've introduced a little bit more depth. Now, I do feel that this midground is really kind of flat. So I think I'm just going to grab a quick brush here and look at this area and lift that somewhat. It just felt incongruously dark to me. So I think opening that up has helped quite a bit to, elevate the scene. Now, in terms of, I don't tend to make too many global adjustments until I've kind of created an equilibrium here. Now, is this an exciting photograph? Not hugely. I feel the interest is the sky here, the tree itself. I'm not feeling massively enthused with this foreground. It all just feels a bit scrappy. So I'm going to re-crop it, and I think I might bring it down to a 2:1, lift up the comp a bit to get more of that sky, because I do like that sweep. Now it starts to feel as if the composition is coming together. The light that presents itself to us when we're in the landscape is all we have. I could spend half an hour on this photograph trying to enhance the light, trying to make it better than it actually was. Whereas in actual fact, there were qualities to that light that make photographs that can only be made in that light. And this is something I discussed in the previous video. So it's just really a case of looking at this and deciding, well, are there ways to make it as good as it can be? And I'm just going to use the radial gradient here. And again, I'm going to invert that to create this vignette. And I'm going to make it very diffused. And I am just going to bring down those edges. And now I can focus, I think, with a brush to just take off the auto mask. I'm just going to add a bit of exposure through this center section. And what that's doing is just making the most of that sense that the light is coming from the back and sort of silhouetting that tree somewhat. I think the important thing is that not every photograph is going to turn out to be a masterpiece. I had a great time in the field. I got my feet nice and wet. I enjoyed the scene and I enjoyed making the photograph. Turning it into something that it isn't, or trying to elevate it beyond its capacity to express itself other than this is what it looked like, can sometimes lead us down very negative avenues. And I don't think that's necessarily a very positive thing to do. Moving on to the second scene that we looked at with the hug, what we have here is quite clearly, now it's cropped itself again. What we have here quite clearly is a focus stack. So the first image is focused for the front here, and then as we move progressively through them, and it's taking my computer a little while to catch up, as we move progressively through them, we're getting more focus in the branch itself. So any focus stack job that we do, we have to select all of the photographs together, and I missed one. So I'm going to select all the photographs. I am going to start by making some adjustments to the crop, and as we can see instantly, the black and white preview has disappeared and Lightroom is offering me color information. Again, we can see some clipping in the blacks here, so I'm going to fix that first. I'm going to lift some of those shadows again and use my white slider to just add a little bit of energy to the scene. Now, when I look at the crop here, I can see that the panel crop again, or the panel aspect ratio, I was very aware of distractions in this frame. And any aspect ratio that's less than full frame, its purpose is really to take things out that we don't want to be there and to create the energy of the scene. So broad panoramic images are very, very dynamic because they force you to read through them left to right or right to left rather than vertically here. Now the actual hug is sort of condensed in this area here, but I do like the original birch tree, and I do like the Scots pine tree. So there may be an opportunity here to readdress this with a different aspect ratio. So here I'm going to pull it into a square and just decide how much of that I need. I do quite like that bit. So that feels more compact Squares are obviously very, very good at condensing and containing the information in a frame. And I think what I'll do now is just make a couple of minor adjustments that boost the vibrance a touch. I think there's some lovely warm tones in there, and I do like the textures in the birch there. But now the hug itself, I think, is a little bit more concise, and I prefer this aspect ratio. Once I go back into the Lightroom catalog here, now we can see all the images and they're just correcting themselves, and with them all selected I am just going to go edit, open as layers in Photoshop. What we have in Adobe Lightroom now is we have a photograph of the hug, and I'm kind of I do quite like it, and again it's one of those things that, you know, it's not an award-winning photograph by any means, and it might not be very interesting to anybody else, but it was something that I noticed in the field and I found it interesting. Now this final scene I really did like. I love this little tree. I pass it on a regular basis, and of course when the mountains are shrouded in mist, things get diffused, things become a little bit more atmospheric. Well, definitely more atmospheric. This is another scene where I don't think I can have a look. Now there is some detail in that sky, so we may want to adjust the exposure to bring out some of that texture, and then lift the shadows a little bit again. Now this is definitely another scene that starts to feel a little bit compressed with this very strong panoramic crop, so I think I'm going to open that up a little bit more and just get a bit more of that rugged highland foreground in there. So again, 2:1 is still quite a panoramic aspect ratio. Again, I'm going to have to lift my blacks because they're clipping slightly, and this is a scene that I really actually quite like, almost as is. And I think this is an important learning point, that so much of our processing these days is about glorifying the landscape, or enhancing the landscape, making it greater than it was when we witnessed it. One of the reasons I stopped the car here was because I was attracted to the landscape, the way it looked, not thinking about unicorns and rainbows and god beams and all sorts of other weird things that we can do to photographs. I was appreciating the textures, the colours, the subtlety and the atmosphere in the landscape for what it was, and I don't need to process this to elaborate or enhance the scene as I witnessed it. I think it's really important to sometimes allow the landscape just to be what it is, and I think if we're tying this in with the quality of the light, it gives us a far more accepting attitude. And the word attitude is everything in landscape photography. If you have a bad attitude, it doesn't matter where you go in the world, you're going to make meaningless photographs. A good attitude is the antidote to bad weather. It's the antidote to expectations. A good attitude will get you way further in your happiness factor and your satisfaction factor than any other form of expectation or fancy processing to make images greater than they really were when you witnessed them. As always, I hope you enjoy this content. Now, I appreciate that when you go out on a dull day, it can be difficult to make photographs that are high impact. It can be difficult to make photographs that are majestic because the landscape just wasn't on that day. It was very subdued. It was very simple. There wasn't a lot of energy in any of the scenes. However, being in the landscape energized me. Being out there and not in front of the computer was a good thing to happen. And I think this is a really important message to take away from not just this video, but many of the videos I make around here. We don't get tons of amazing light days around here. And when we do, yes, they're very lovely, but that's not the norm. What you're looking at today is very normal for the west of Scotland during the winter months. I think this attitude thing is one of the most important things you should be taking away from this video. Wherever you are in the world, you can find things to photograph. You just need to look past your expectations. Finding a macro lens and diving into a cornfield can be just as satisfying as setting up a wide-angled lens in front of a big pointy mountain at sunset. Creativity is not a function of the images we make, it is the lifestyle that we choose to live. And I think this is an increasingly important message that I'm going to be hammering on a weekly basis on the Expressive Photography channel. If you do appreciate my work and you do like the things that I say, then please consider supporting our work either by buying a copy of Out of Darkness, which is now shipping. There are 3 editions, the standard, which is just the book, which is very beautiful in its own right, and then there's the deluxe version, which comes with a choice of prints and a beautiful red slipcase, and then of course the collector's edition, which comes with 5 prints and comes in a massive A2 box and is going to contain 25 minutes of music composed by myself as well. So there's all sorts of different buying options. If that's beyond your financial capability, please consider buying an ebook, the Creativity series, the Expressive Photography series, be it Luminosity and Contrast, The Colour of Meaning, Creativity Superpowers. All of those ebooks are going to help you see the landscape in a different way and build that attitude of being out there in a far better mindset. If none of that is to your liking, just give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already done so, and we appreciate that too. That's it for today. I look forward to bringing you some more content next week, and wherever you are in the world, please, I hope you're safe and well and you can get out into somewhere natural and engage and chill. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.